when people ask what is the fundamental principle of Buddhism, you could very well answer a tomato. Because look how, when you examine the material world, how diaphanous it is. It really isn't very solid. Tomato doesn't last very long. Nor, for that matter, do the things that we consider most exemplary of physical reality, such as mountains. The poet says, "The hills are shadows, and they flow from form to form, and nothing stands." Because the physical world is diaphanous. It's like music. When you play music, it simply disappears. There's nothing left. And that, for that very reason, it is one of the highest and most spiritual of the arts, because it is the most transient. And so, in a way, you might say that transiency is a mark of spirituality. A lot of people think the opposite, that the spiritual things are the everlasting things. But you see, the more a thing tends to be permanent, the more it tends to be lifeless. Realize that I met you before and that I see you again. But the thing that I recognize is not anything really except a consistent pattern. Let's suppose I have a rope. And this rope begins by being manila rope. Then it goes on by being cotton rope. Then it goes on with being nylon. Then it goes on with being silk. So I tie a knot in the rope. And I move the knot down along the rope. Now, is it, as it moves along, the same knot or a different knot? We would say it was the same, because you recognize the pattern of the knot. But at one point it's manila, at another point it's cotton, at another point it's nylon, and another it's silk. And that's just like us. We are recognized by the fact that one day you face the same way as you did the day before. And people recognize your facing. So they say that's John Doe or Mary Smith. But actually the contents of your face, whatever they may be, the water, the carbons, the chemicals, are changing all the time. You're like a whirlpool in a stream. The stream is doing this consistent whirlpooling, and we always recognize, like at the Niagara, the whirlpool is one of the sights. But the water is always moving on. And this is why it's so spiritual. To be non-spiritual is not to see that. In other words, it is to impose upon the physical world the idea of thingness, of substantiality. That is to be involved in matter, to identify with the body. To believe, in other words, that the body is something constant, something tangible. So therefore, if you cling to the body, you will be frustrated. So the whole point is that the material world, the world of nature, is marvelous, so long as you don't try to lean on it. And if you don't cling to it, you can have a wonderful time. Let's take a very controversial issue. All spiritual people are generally against lovemaking. In my point of view, yes, women can be a source of evil if you attempt to possess them. I mean, if you can say of another person, "I love you so much I want to own you," and really tie you down and call you, well, it's like that poem of Ogden Nash, where someone claimed that he loved his wife so much he climbed a mountain and named it after her. Called it Mount Mrs. Oswald Tregennis. And so, in other words, if you try to possess people and you make your sexual passion possessive in that way, then of course you are trying to cling to the physical world. But you see, women are in a way much more interesting if you don't cling to them. If you let them be themselves and be free. And in my opinion, you can have a very spiritual sex life if you are not possessive. But if on the other hand you are possessive, then you're in trouble. But you know, The average Swami won't agree with that, because he confuses, by thinking that the body that I touch is something evil. He's hung up with it. It's like the story of the two Zen monks who were crossing a river, and the ford was very deep because of the flood, and there was a girl trying to get across, and one of the monks immediately picked her up, threw her over his shoulder, and carried her across, put her down on the other side, and then the monks went one way and she went another. And the other monk had been in a kind of embarrassed silence, which he finally broke, and he said, "Do you realize that you broke a monastic rule by touching and picking up a woman like that?" And he said, "Oh, but I left her on the other side of the river, and you're still carrying her." So the whole question then, you see, is that even you can find this to some extent in that rather irritable saint, Paul, where he speaks of the opposition of the flesh and the spirit. Now, this word, sarx, in Greek, the flesh, as he uses it, is really, as Berdyaev points out, it's a spiritual category. For the Christian, you see, the Word is made flesh in Christ, and there will be the resurrection of the body in the final consummation of the universe. So you cannot really, as an Orthodox Christian, take an antagonistic attitude to the flesh. Why then does St. Paul take an antagonistic attitude to the flesh? Well, you can only save the situation and make the New Testament consistent with itself by saying that he meant by the flesh a certain kind of spiritual category. He didn't mean this, because this isn't flesh. Flesh is a concept. This is not. And so the flesh, or you might say, we talk about the sins of the flesh, they have entirely to do with certain hang-ups that we have about our bodies. And that again is what I would call leaning on the world, exploiting it. When you take, as a Buddhist, you take the third precept, Kame sumichachara veramani sikapadam samadhiyami. And it's usually translated, I undertake the precept to refrain from adultery. It doesn't say anything of the kind. Kama is passion. Kame sumichahara, therefore, is, I undertake the precept not to exploit the passions. So in other words, you may be bored, see? And you're feeling sort of empty and at a loose end, and you think, well, I don't know, let's go and commit adultery. It might liven things up, see? And that would be what they call in Zen, raising waves when no wind is blowing. It would be quite a different matter if, in a perfectly spontaneous and natural way, you fell in love with some woman. You wouldn't be going out of your way to get into trouble. It would be appropriate and natural at the time. Or in the same way, a lot of people, instead of saying, let's commit adultery, when they feel sort of bored, they say, let's go and eat something. And so they become fatter and fatter and fatter because they're filling the spiritual vacuum in their psyche with food, which doesn't do the job. It's not the function of food to fill spiritual vacuums. So in this way, one exploits the appetites or the passions. So likewise also the fifth precept, Sura Merya Majjapamadhatana, is the list of intoxicating substances. And it doesn't say that you are not going to take them. It says you're not going to be intoxicated by them. In other words, a Buddhist may drink but not get drunk. I don't know how that applies to psychedelics, but that's another story. So one might say then that we are confused through and through about what we mean by the material world. And what I'm first of all doing is I'm just giving a number of illustrations which show how confused we are. And let me repeat this to get it clear, because it is rather complicated. In the first place, we confuse abstract symbols, that is to say numbers and words and formulae, with physical events, as we confuse money with consumable wealth. In the second place, we confuse physical events, the whole class and category of physical events, with matter. But matter, you see, is an idea, it's a concept. It's the concept of stuff, of something solid and permanent that you can catch hold of. Now, you just can't catch hold of the physical world. Physical world is the most evasive, elusive process that there is. It will not be pinned down, and therefore it fulfills all the requirements of spirit. So what I'm saying then is that the non-abstract world, which Korzybski called unspeakable, which was really a rather good word, is the spiritual world. And the spiritual world isn't something kind of gaseous, abstract, formless, in that sense of shapeless. It's formless in another sense. The formless world is the wiggly world. See, when we say something is shapeless, like a cloud, what shape has this cloud? You say, well, it's so vague, it's shapeless. That's the real formless world. The formal world is the one that human beings try to construct all the time. See, wherever human beings have been around, you see rectangles and straight lines, because we're always trying to straighten things out. And so that's the very mark of our presence. I don't know why we do it. It's always been a puzzle to me why architects are always using rectangles. But the thing is that they make us feel very uncomfortable if they don't. I have an architect friend who built somebody a house like a snail shell. And it spiraled in and in and in and in, and the John was right at the center. Spiral. But everybody rebels against this house. They feel very uncomfortable. You see, the furniture doesn't fit, because all furniture is made to fit in a rectilinear scene. And we're always putting things in boxes. See, all thoughts, all words are labels on boxes. Therefore, we feel we've got to get everything boxed. And so we put ourselves in boxes. Everything is put in boxes. But actually, everything else in nature doesn't go that way. As, for example, the snail doesn't put itself in a box. The crab doesn't put itself in a box. It has these fascinating, gorgeous objects. What is, for example, more beautiful than a conch shell or a lovely scallop shell? Well, these are gorgeous things. We could make the most delicious shells out of concrete or plastics. They could be very beautiful. And we could distribute ourselves over the landscape like shellfish along the seashore. But instead we have to live in boxes. And there's nothing, you can't fight it, it's the system. So, then you have to, you begin to build your furniture and chairs, everything, accordingly to these shapes, because they're easy to store away in a place that is a box in the first place. But you see, then that is this rectilineal world. This is unspiritual. This is the world of what we will call the artificial as distinct from the natural. And when we live in a world like that, we begin to have ourselves bamboozled by it. You begin to think that reality is this sort of straightened out situation that we all have to live in. And you don't remember that reality is precisely the wiggly world, you see? We don't realize that we are all wiggly. The problem is that we wiggle in rather the same way. We have head, 2 arms, 2 legs, etc. But notice how we do all sorts of things to ourselves to sort of evade our wiggliness. The way we dress, especially men. Women are allowed to be a little bit more curvaceous and wiggly than men are. It's somewhat appreciated. But men go around in these square-cut suits and straight pants. They're really, these clothes that we wear in the West are originally military uniforms. Do you know that? That's why they have buttons on the sleeve. Because they used to have buttons all the way up the sleeves so that people wouldn't wipe their noses on their sleeves. They were livery, in other words. And this uniform is being adopted all over the world. I was in Ceylon in November. And the moment I got to Ceylon, I saw the men were going around in sarongs with long white shirts over them. So I bought such an outfit. It was terribly hot, and therefore this kind of clothing was extremely comfortable. They wear a sort of a stole, usually yellow or orange, which is a little scarf with fringe around your neck. And it's a most easy, wonderful garment for loafing around in. Well, I was invited to speak at the University of Ceylon, Kandy. And I found when I got there, I found that it was a very tense atmosphere because there was a great degree of anti-American feeling because we cut off aid and they don't approve of our behavior in Vietnam and all that kind of thing. So I was an American speaker, and when I appeared, they started booing. But I was wearing Sinhalese clothes. And I got up and said, I had an interpreter who was a very bright psychology graduate student. And I got up and said, ladies and gentlemen, and the gentlemen, incidentally, were all wearing white shirts and pants. And I got up and said, ladies and gentlemen, I have purposely put on tonight your national dress. For the first reason, it is practical. You have developed this over many hundreds of years as the right kind of clothes to wear in this climate, and I find it very suitable. Second is, it is properly adapted to male anatomy. And there's a big laugh at this. And the interpreter whispered to me, he said, you meant it that way, didn't you? I said, yes. But you know, that broke the ice. And there was no further trouble. But you see, there's a curious paradox about this. That kind of clothing follows the wiggliness of things and doesn't contradict it. But what is the paradoxical about it is that both these Sinhalese clothes and Japanese clothes and Indonesian clothes don't attempt to violate the nature of cloth. And they are more rectangular than our clothes, but they don't look that way when you put them on. You can take a kimono and fold it and pack it away, and when you unpack, you don't have to have it pressed. The Sinhalese Minister of Education's wife was talking to us about saris. She said, I've got these saris, I can pack 20 saris into a small suitcase. When I travel, I can wear 3 a day. They're nothing but an enormous piece of woven material, rectilinear. But they feel, you see, that since it is the nature of cloth to be woven this way and to be rectilinear, you shouldn't violate the nature of cloth when you make clothes. So we, with all these fitted clothes that we have, with this extraordinary shoulder work and so on, they're impossible to pack. Every time you travel with a business suit, you have to get it pressed if you want to look decent. And that's true of many women's clothes too. But by following the nature of cloth and not violating it, the cloth then will follow the nature of your body. And it will gracefully adapt to it and hang in just the right way. And by, as it were, respecting the physical world, in either case, it all goes together. But this world, this physical world, is wiggly. And this is the most important thing to realize about it. As I've sometimes said, we're living in the middle of a Rorschach blot. And there really is no way that the physical world is. In other words, the nature of truth, I said in the beginning, somebody had said that thoughts were made to conceal truth. This is the fact, because there is no such thing as the truth that can be stated. In other words, ask the question, what is the true position of the stars in the Big Dipper? Well, it depends where you're looking at them from. And there is no absolute position. So in the same way, accountants, a good accountant will tell you that any balance sheet is simply a matter of opinion. There's no such thing as a true state of affairs of a business. But we're all hooked on the idea that there is, you see, an external objective world which is a certain way. And that it really is that way. History, for example, is a matter of opinion. History is an art, not a science. It's something constructed, which is accepted as a more or less satisfactory explanation of events, which, as a matter of fact, don't have an explanation at all. Most of what happens in history is completely irrational. But people always have to feel that they've got to find a meaning. For example, you get sick, and you've lived a very good life, and you've been helpful to other people and done all sorts of nice things. Then you get cancer. And you say to the clergyman, why did this have to happen to me? And you're looking for an explanation, and there isn't one. It just happened that way. But people feel if they can't find an explanation, they feel very, very insecure. Why? Because they haven't been able to straighten things out. The world is not that way. So the truth, in other words, what is going on, is of course a lot of wiggles. But the way it is always in relation to the way you are. In other words, however hard I hit a skinless drum, it will make no noise. Because noise is a relationship between a fist and a skin. So in exactly the same way, light is a relationship between electrical energy and eyeballs. It is you, in other words, who evoke the world, and you evoke the world in accordance with what kind of a you are, what kind of an organism. One organism evokes one world, another organism evokes another world. And so everything, reality is a kind of relationship.